Welcome, everyone. Hi there.
Hello, everybody, and welcome from me as well.
Hello.
Good to have you here, wherever you are in the world.
Maybe you could just start by putting in the chat where you're from, where you're calling in from today. That's always useful for me to see. So I'm in Auckland, New Zealand. Italy, wonderful.
I know that I'll be meeting Akihiko shortly in a few days in San Diego as well, so that'll be
Oh,
lovely.
very nice.
Nice to get together
Washington,
in person.
fantastic. Few more coming in.
Hi, Lisa. How are you? And so, should we get started? So, Ian's been with us a
Tokyo.
few times over the years. We love his work. He's I'd say if I think of schema coaching, I think of Ian. Not many other people actually. As the go-to. He's got numerous books on the subject, and we will, with the thank you email for this webinar, we'll share the slides and we'll also share information about his latest book as well. Ian, fantastic to have you with us. We appreciate your work, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire. So for those who haven't met me, a very brief background. First of all, greetings from Auckland. So we're just moving into summer. So it's 8:02 in the morning on a Tuesday morning, which all seems a bit strange if you're in the other side of the world, but and it's a very nice day here. So my background is originally I trained as a clinical psychologist and I worked in prisons and I had my own therapeutic practice for some years. And then I was invited on a expedition to Antarctica as a field psychologist. And so I wrote that work up as my PhD. So my PhD is in work stress. And then I got into management consulting with Deloitte and worked in New Zealand and Canada. And then after some years, got a bit bored and moved to Hong Kong and started a business there and then came back to New Zealand about 25 years ago and gradually moved out of management consulting and into coaching. And so I just coach, I write books, and I train people in the topics of my books. And that really leads us to today. So I'll just share my screen. So what I'm going to talk about today is 6 practical steps for every effective coach, which is a book that came out earlier this year. And it's on a topic that I find really fascinating. And I just want to introduce you to some research, which I hope you'll find interesting, if slightly frightening. So the first one is a paper called All Downhill from Your PhD, which shows that the publication citation rates, which is essentially the success of your research, decreases with experience from your initial paper, so the initial paper after your PhD, the first paper you publish, does quite well in terms of impact, and then you steadily decline over time. Now, that's quite a frightening thing if you're a researcher, but the same thing happens in all sorts of other professions. So, a really interesting longitudinal study, 170 therapists, 6,500 clients, found that when you measure therapeutic effectiveness in terms of client outcome, so not how confident the person is, etc., but are the clients getting any better, therapists get worse over time, which is a frightening kind of prospect. And it does make you wonder what is going on because it's not only the case for researchers and for therapists. This kind of approach seems to apply and be relevant for all sorts of professions, And so I basically speculated that it's probably the case for coaches too. So I just want you to think about as we go through this and maybe just make a few notes as we proceed. How many hours do you think you have spent in the last year? So would take from October to October. And then what percentage of what you've learned in your professional development have you fully implemented? And we'll come back to that issue because that issue appears to be quite central to why many people, not everyone, of course, why many people seem to actually deteriorate over their career in terms of client effectiveness. So have a just think about how many conferences you've been to, how many books you've read, how many webinars you've been to, etc., etc. And I'm sure what you'll find is that all of those are really exciting and interesting things, and they have lots of spin-offs. So when you go to a conference, you meet neat people and so on. But the interesting thing is that when most people think about what they fully implemented, the surveys tend to suggest that we implement about 20% of what we learn. Now, that's quite a frightening aspect. It doesn't mean to say that we don't implement some of the other 80%, but fully implement looks at like about 20%. So why is it that despite how we feel, because often as we progress through our career, we feel like we are more confident. We feel like we know more because we do intellectually learn things. But in terms of client outcome, we don't seem to get very much better unless we engage in a certain way with our professional development. And that's really what I want to talk about. So I think this is really just me speculating as to why. We don't really know. There's not a lot of research on this, but this is my speculation. If you think about how professional development courses come up, and this is an example of it, basically you've got wonderful, enthusiastic people like Claire who are looking around to seeing new books and new areas that are coming up, and then you learn about those. So what happens in terms of professional development is when you look at what you've learned, you tend to learn rather a random range of different things. So they're not a systematic, this year I'm just going to focus on schema coaching or whatever it is. We tend to be driven by what is offered in the marketplace. And very often what is offered is exactly what I'm very guilty of doing today, which is giving you an introduction to something without actually you being able to implement all of these things. So what we see is that when people read books, they get lots of good ideas. When they go to webinars, they get lots of good ideas, but they don't necessarily implement those. And the third is, in a sense, slightly more frightening. And let me tell you a brief story about this. I had a little skin lesion and I went to my skin surgeon some months ago. And while he was cutting a hole in my hand and taking out a bit of skin, he was asked me what I do, and I was talking about this book. And I was saying about this issue of professional development and the fact that in many ways it's not as effective as you'd think. And he said, well, that's totally true for plastic surgeons because I have to go 4 times a year, I have to do X hours, and actually almost none of that I implement. It's all really interesting, it's fascinating, but actually typically it doesn't drive a change in my practice. So he was a very interesting example. And of course, there are things you can do. And the process that I'm going to talk about for the next little while is called deliberate practice. And that's really the process of if you do actually want to get better steadily over your career, then we know a lot about what really works well. And that's what I'm going to give you the introduction to, and that's really what the book's about. So when we look at the research on deliberate practice, we find seven things that are important. First of all, people need to set specific and clear improvement goals. So, for example, many of us in our professional development basically pick out a competency and say, well, actually, maybe what we want to do this time is to improve our core coaching skills, something like that. Now, that's not a clear, specific improvement. Maybe what a clear, specific improvement is a goal that relates to, well, maybe we're going to implement schema coaching with 20% of our new clients next year. And we're going to do an engagement survey with those 20 and see if they're satisfied with our work. So something that's much, much more specific. We need intentional, regular practice, and we'll talk about that. You need clear, actionable feedback. Most feedback you get from coaching is really kind of happy sheet type feedback, and we know that doesn't really help us to change. You need support from your supervisor or coach. You need to push yourself beyond your comfort zone. You need to see yourself as being able to build up a mental image of yourself as being able to do this and to systematically implement things. And I just want to give you an example. In the book, I give a range of examples, including I talk about Mozart, who seems like he's just a brilliant genius, but actually, if you look at his life, he was trained very systematically and very thoroughly. But another slightly different example is from, well, it was made into a movie called Top Gun. Tom Cruise, as you probably can recall that movie, and it was about the story of US fighter pilots during the Vietnam War. What happened during that time was that those pilots were having dogfights with Soviet trained North Vietnamese pilots, and initially they did incredibly well. But over time, like in many professions, they found that their success rate was starting to decline. And the Americans decided to do something about it, and they set up the school. Interestingly, they set it up with relatively modest resources, so it wasn't well funded, but there were personnel available to really teach the fighter crew. So, first of all, they had a clear goal. They wanted to train fighter crews in all aspects of weapon systems so that they could win dogfights in Vietnam. What they did was they set up two groups, a student group that was called the Blue Force, and then an enemy, in inverted commas, a red team that consisted of highly capable fighter pilots. And every day, the blue team fought with the red team. So you had this intensive practice that occurred every day. And after every dogfight, the instructors went over the process of what happened with the students, and the students got really good at questioning and answering questions, first of all, about why they did what and whether they'd thought about it early enough, and if the enemy came out of the sun, what they were going to do about it, etc., etc., to the point where they were so good at answering those questions, they began to ask them themselves. So they really had this intensive kind of training. And that's the sort of thing that we know works really well. So, what can we do as coaches? So, there has been a whole lot of work done with psychotherapists because psychotherapists are the same as coaches insofar as we know that the quality of the coaching relationship is the most important thing in terms of client outcome. If you want to do really good coaching, then you have to build an effective working alliance or relationship to get the best out of them. But we all know that sometimes the relationship isn't as good as others. And so the approach used in this area, which all the details are in the book, is essentially to identify the sorts of clients that you don't like working with so much. Now, if you really hate working with them, you should refer them on. But we've all got clients, some of which are better than others. So for me, I'm not very good at working with angry and belligerent clients. And I can see in my family history why that's the case. I was always a bit of a kind of a peacemaker at home. I was always the sort of the people pleaser. So I'm not very good at dealing with anger. So the idea of this approach is that you identify where you're not so good, which sort of clients you're not so good for. And there's a series of techniques, but the most interesting one is this. Go onto YouTube and find some video clips of people expressing this emotion. So what I did was I found a film with Revolution called Revolutionary Road, and it's got Kate Winslet in it, amongst other actors, and it's about a couple who are deciding to move out of Middle America and go to Paris, and they're fighting about it. And there are lots and lots of really effective, brilliantly acted, angry scenes in this film. And there's a whole lot of clips on the internet, so you can watch anger like this. You can expose yourself to anger, and I'll just tell you what happened with me. So as I say, I'm not very good with angry clients. Uh, and what I did was when I found this film clip and I started watching it, I really was very observant of how I was feeling and what I was doing. And the moment it came on and they started really yelling and screaming at each other, I felt really uncomfortable. And then I noticed that I kind of smirked. I sort of smiled at them and I thought, gee, this is a really strange, why am I smiling at these people who are angry? And I came to realize that that was just a kind of a defense I'd developed over the years whereby I distance myself from anger by kind of laughing at it. And what I found was that over about 10 days, if I watched this film clip every day, I could get myself to the stage of being able to watch it without actually smirking, without distancing, and starting to feel a degree of compassion and concern, and starting to be able to analyze and look at the dynamics of how this couple antagonized each other. So, the lesson out of all of this is if you want to be a good coach, you need to stay emotionally connected with your clients. If you want to improve your emotional connection, you need to find out the sorts of clients that you're not so comfortable with, and then find ways of exposing yourself to that emotion in a harmless and careful way. And obviously, being very careful if you have any trauma in your life, that you don't trigger off some kind of unfortunate reaction. So you need to be careful. You need to do it, talk with your supervisor about it, etc., talk with your coach. Um, but exposing yourself to this degree of emotion can be incredibly powerful in enabling you to improve your emotional connection. Now, you don't have to do it with film clips. You can do it with imagined sequence. You can record your coaching sessions, watch them with your supervisor, and carefully look for your moment of disconnection. So that's the first technique, really, in terms of if we want to be a really effective coach, if we really want to develop expertise, we have to learn to stay connected to a wider range of clients. And we can learn that through these kind of sequences. The second area that has been very well researched is the idea of skill building. Now, if you think about the training courses that you go to, so maybe you went on a one-day course on acceptance and commitment coaching, for example, let's just take that as an example. You will have had some lectures, you may have seen a video, you probably had some discussion, and then you had a role play. But in the role play, you very often worked through a scenario with someone, but you did it in a relatively superficial way because you probably only had 20 minutes for this role play and you didn't really get into the depth of some of these skills. So, what we know from deliberate practice is if you want to get really good at some of these skills, what you need to do is break the skill down into micro skills. So, if we take the skill of, very important in coaching, empathetic confrontation, we know that that consists of a whole series of micro skills. So, for example, you need to be able to develop an empathetic response. So that means listening, paraphrasing, checking your understanding, matching their body language, and so on. You need to think about the challenge process. So, what is it you're going to challenge? How are you going to challenge it? What are you going to say? What's the right timing? So you break the skill down into those micro skills, and then you develop a series of scenarios with clients. So you might say, okay, what's a way of taking empathetic confrontation, the skill, breaking it down into 5 or 6 micro skills? How do we apply that set of micro skills to a client that's anxious, for example? And uh, we might develop some scenarios and then we practice those scenarios so that we have someone who plays the role of the client and says, oh, I feel incredibly upset about being here. And the person thinks about, well, okay, now what's the empathetic response to that? And then what's a possible challenge and so on. So they practice at a really detailed level, the micro skills, and they repeat that because what we know about psychotherapy and coaching is that we need to overlearn skills to the point where we can do them authentically and spontaneously before we improve our client impact. And if we think about a lot of the learning that we do, it's great, it's useful, it's fun, it's interesting, but it doesn't often get us to the point of overlearning where the skill comes automatically. And that's really what one of the core areas of deliberate practice is. How do we overlearn this stuff? And you can see this can take time, but it's really interesting to get into. And I'll just tell you a little story to give you an example. I was recently working with someone who wanted to improve their reframing skills. So we know that reframing is another core skill in coaching. So this is the idea of how can you say something to someone so that they suddenly are able to see this problem as an opportunity to be solved? Or how do they see the setback as a really important learning for their life? So, um, but reframing is hard to do, and I'm sure you will all agree. I mean, I have practiced this for years and years. I think I'm okay at it. I wouldn't say that I'm really great. But if we think about the skill of reframing, what I did with the coach that I was working with, we broke reframing down into the micro skills. We practiced each of those until they could overlearn them. And then we set an exercise. And what I suggested to the coach was that they go to a cafe and they sit down by themselves and they get out their phone and they pretend to read their phone, but they try and listen to a conversation on another table in the cafe. Okay. Now, very often, what you'll find when you do that is one person is talking about, oh, well, my boss wasn't nice to me, or this happened, or that happened, or whatever. Very often, they're kind of negative things people talk about under those circumstances. Not always, but sit in a cafe, listen to some negative conversation, and then when you are ready, just stop the conversation in your own mind. So don't say anything to them, but just say, okay, so the last thing the person said was, my boss is always like this to me. Then you spend a bit of time thinking about, well, if a client said that to me, how could I reframe it? Okay. So we're picking up on spontaneous conversation in this exercise, and we're using it to practice and to overlearn reframing. So just an example of the kind of detail and intensity that really makes a difference to people who really want to get on top of this skill development. So the next area is deliberate feedback. Now, what we know is that many coaches get feedback. So typically the thing that the coach will say towards the end of the session is, are we on target? Are you enjoying the coach? Are you reaching your goals, etc. Now, what we know is that that feedback isn't actionable because typically you've got a very effective social conformity working. You're asking the person to evaluate your work in front of you. They're going to be polite to you. They're going to say something nice to you. So it's typically not very actionable. What we know is that if you assess three things, the quality of the coaching relationship, as we said before, that's absolutely vital. The level of progress that the client has made in coaching, and this is a questionnaire, and an open question about what the client thinks that you could do or could be done in the sessions to make it better for them, then when you ask something really specific like that, you actually get actionable feedback. So in the book, I've got a couple of questionnaires. This is a questionnaire that is based on the session rating scale out of psychotherapy. It's been adapted to fit the coaching environment, but basically it's about the quality of the relationships. So it asks the coach listened, attended, understood, and showed me respect. The coach and I focused on what I wanted to in the session. The coach's approach was a good match for my needs, and overall, today's coaching session was effective for me. So that's a well-designed questionnaire to measure the quality of the relationship. And then you can assess the client's progress by asking them what their general psychological well-being is at the moment, what their social well-being, what their vocational well-being, overall, what is their well-being, and then how much progress they've made in producing results. And these questionnaires are all in the book, and they're in the slides, and you can have these. And then, of course, the last question is, what suggestion does the client have to help the coach improve the coaching process? And let me just tell you a story about this because I've obviously spent a lot of time implementing this, and I find this just fascinating. So overall, I've been a coach for 25 years. I've always got work in the area. I now no longer do any, haven't done for years, management consulting. I just coach, and I always have enough clients. So I think I do all right, but I decided to think about this. How could I actually improve? And when I used this questionnaire with quite a number of clients, what I found was they said, the quality of the coaching relationship is great. I definitely make progress, but I could make more progress if I had some kind of follow-up. So when I drilled into that with the people, what they said was, love the coaching sessions. We always have an action plan at the end. That's really great. But what happens is I get back to work. I then turn on my computer. I've then got 20 emails to answer. I then get distracted and I forget to implement what we've talked about. I get caught up in all sorts of other things and time just passes. And then as I'm driving to your office, Iain, I think, oh, I should have done X or Y. So they said to me, Iain, if you could develop some kind of simple graphic one page that illustrated things like how to handle my emotions better, how to deal with difficult people, whatever the topic is that I'm working on, and you sent those to me a few days after the coaching session, that would be a fantastic reminder for me to actually get back and think about the coaching and to actually implement some things. So I hope that story gives you some encouragement. There is real value in taking a much more structured approach to getting actionable feedback from your clients. And I certainly think that I have improved because of that, because I've done that. And I hope you will try it out. There are other skills that you can learn. One of the things that we know about a coaching session is that you need to use the right skills at the right time. So this is part of a little training program. Again, it's all fully documented. And what I've done is I've just taken a traditional model of coaching and just adapted it for my purposes. So I've said, if you want to look at any coaching session, you've got five steps. So you've got the opening phase in which you need to build a positive atmosphere and have the client focus. You've got an objectives phase where you're clarifying what does the client want to achieve, what are the themes that are coming up, etc., etc. You've got the operational focus where you're maybe giving them feedback or you're exploring ideas and so on. And then you've got an outcomes stage where you're agreeing homework, you're concluding, you're agreeing on the next steps. And then throughout the arrow at the bottom, throughout the entire session, of course, you're listening, questioning, strengthening the relationship, giving the other person confidence. So the idea of this model is that you sit down with your supervisor or coach, or you do this in a training program, and you work through a role play with someone, preferably actually not a role play, but what I would call a real play. So you find someone to work with in the training where you're not talking about a made up case, you're actually helping to coach them on a real problem they have. So, and you get someone to observe you and you get them to watch these 5 phases and you get clear, actionable feedback on which skill you're using when and whether you're using it in an effective way. So those are the main skills in deliberate practice. So you can see that this process requires time and effort. You can do it on your own. I've definitely done that and I've found it highly effective. You can do it in courses or you can run courses on it. But you really need to get to the point of effortless recall, of overlearning the skills so that you can use them authentically, you can use them whenever you want, and particularly in times of stress and high demand, where actually your ability to think through and develop ideas and to come up with suggestions is not as good as if you're relaxed. So deliberate practice, in my view, really offers coaches a new way of thinking about their professional development and a new way of focusing much more. So one of the things that I do in the coaches I supervise is I often suggest they read less books and they go to less courses. And they focus more on not just reading one book. Gee, that was really interesting. I've got a big pile by my desk or on my by my bed, and I'm going to pick up the next. But really drill into some of these ideas, identify the best of them, really get into building in an effective way your skills. And there are lots of ways you can do this. Excuse me. In the book, I've got a detailed action plan, a work plan of how you can do it. And it's just a systematic way of working through this. I run a 75-hour training program if you want in this, if you're interested in learning this in more detail and improving your own skills in coaching. But also, today what I'm offering is a free training course. So if this kind of work interests you and you'd like to do it yourself, but you would also like to have a free 1 day training program outline. So here's how to run a 1 day program on deliberate practice and a full slide deck for the day. Then email me either through Claire or directly. And or contact me on LinkedIn. I'd be very happy to provide you with the material free of charge. So I'm really enthusiastic about this kind of idea that coaches really can improve over time in terms of client effectiveness. We know we grow in confidence over our career, we grow knowledge, but how do we actually become more effective in terms of implementing um, new skills and abilities with our clients? So that's really my mission for today. And you might like to just take a few moments to just write a bit of an action plan. What are some of the ideas out of this that you've found useful? What is it that you want to learn or relearn? What kinds of skills do you really want to focus on? Because what we know is the more you focus, the more that you get into the detail at a micro skill level, the more you stay engaged, the more you get feedback, the better off you'll be. So that's my presentation for today. I hope you found that interesting. I would be extremely keen to just now have a discussion with you, either if you want to raise your hand, if you just want to turn on your mic and ask me a question or make a statement, or if you want to put it in the chat. Maybe Claire can just keep her eye on the chat, and if I miss the questions, she can ask me. So um, I'm open. Maybe we can just start with people's reflection on what percentage of what they've learnt in the last year they think they've actually fully implemented. If you think about that question, which we started with at the beginning, have people got any thoughts about how much they actually fully implement? I'd be very interested to know. Or any other questions or statements?
Okay, I'm going to ask.
Yes. Thank you,
So,
Lisa.
no problem. So I'm going to say conceptually, I'm kind of there with you because I found myself
Right.
thinking about after going through supervision with Claire,
Yes.
I found myself thinking about what is the coachability of coaches and how
Yes.
I'm going to say adaptable or flexible we are, or I'm not sure what word I want to use there.
Yep.
I found myself thinking, like when you said effortless recall, that resonated a lot more than automatic responding, because automatic responding to me flew in
Yes.
the face of being present. So I
Yes.
felt like it was
Yes.
an oxymoron to say automatic
Yes.
response
Yes.
versus being present with the client, because I don't think we know our automatic response per se. Do we
No.
understand how to play with our tools? Okay, I get that. So in a sense, the wording threw me off at the beginning. I was like resisting
Yes.
your
Yes.
concepts. And then when you said effortless recall, that seemed to soften it and bring me back around. So I
Yeah.
found myself thinking about this in terms of where clients are and how you meet clients where they wish to be, when they
Yep.
want guidance, when they want coaching. Because
Yep.
I will say, as I see more and more on platforms, I think there's a lot of clients who are looking for more mentorship than coaching.
Yes. I agree totally. I agree
So
totally.
I'm
Yep.
just, I know that's a statement, but like I found myself thinking, like, are we true to coaching? And I know you took a leap from the therapist over to coaching, and I could see why you do that. But are there any studies that correlate it to coaching per
Yeah.
se? And I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about that out loud.
Yeah, and the answer to that is not yet. So I hope I can stimulate interest in this area. If you look at the psychotherapeutic area, there are books out on deliberate practice in schema therapy and CBT. There's other books out on deliberate practice and ACT, etc. So we see in that area there has been a real burgeoning of work and a real desire to try and take these principles and apply them at a very practical level to areas people are working in. And that's what I hope will happen with coaching as well. But at the moment, as far as I know, I'm the only one that's really written about this kind of topic. So it's very much in its infancy. But I'm delighted that you bring up this issue of automatic. And if I use the word automatic, that's not a very good word. I totally agree. I try to use the phrase, you are able to do this spontaneously and authentically. So something like that. But it's really this idea that unless you have effortless recall, then you are going to really struggle to find that moment. And what we know in coaching is that there are critical moments where saying something to the client at that particular time will open the door and open their mind. And that same thing said 5 minutes later, uh, the topic's changed. 5 minutes earlier, they're not ready to listen. So we really, this issue of effortless recall is so important. So I think we're very much on the same wavelength, Lisa.
Okay.
Thank you. Other comments, other questions, other issues people want to raise?
I'm curious, Ian, when you're supervising, so I'm thinking more in the EMCC definition of, what's involved in supervision.
Yes.
Do you also, with your client, listen to their coaching work as recordings?
Yes, yes. And that's really where psychotherapy started, with this idea of trying to look for disconnection between the client and the therapist. So, yes. However, what I would say is that can be a very time consuming and at times very tedious process. And quite difficult for clients, one, to get the recording, and painful for them to listen to themselves. So I have really felt like if we could give people, and that's really what I'm trying to do in the book, is to give people a range of different things that they can use, a range of different techniques they can use to remain connected, then they're more likely to do it. But listening to coaching sessions in supervision is a fantastic way to do it. Yes, if you can, if you have the time.
Yeah.
Do you do that much, Claire?
So I do, and sometimes I contract because there's people from the ICF world as well. So
Yes,
sometimes I contract for supervision and mentor coaching, and then whichever is most suitable at that time, unless, of course, they're doing it for their certain hours of
yes.
credentialing and they need one or the other.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay, okay. And how do you deal with the problem of, this is an hour session the client has had and recorded, and then you're listening back to you. How do you manage the time in that? Do you flick forward, or do you get them to pick out particular moments they want you to listen to, or how do you deal with the time management aspect of it?
So if it's mentor coaching for credentialing for ICF, then I always listen to it. I put an hour in my diary before their session, listen to it then, and then it's fresh in my mind. And we work on it, maybe now and again, playing a little bit during
Right,
the
okay.
actual, the generative feedback session. Whereas if it's for people from the EMCC world, I tend to either listen live together and they
Right.
share, or ask them to send a snippet ahead of time. Do you want me
Ah,
to listen to 5 minutes? And it may be from minute 15 to 20, for
yes.
example.
Okay, yeah, I really like that idea, Claire. I think that's neat. So if you can get the coach to identify the critical times in the recording, then you can just skip through those and watch those and just see. Yeah, 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 yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. And you can really see, can't you, just how for all sorts of, internal, unconscious certainly not logical reasons, it's easy to get disconnected from our clients for a moment. And that really does absolutely nothing for the relationship. So it's a great skill. Thank you. Great question. Anybody else? Are there other questions that people want to raise or other comments people want to make?
Okay, may I ask one thing? Can you
Sure.
hear me? Okay.
Yes, I
Well,
can.
I
Thank
think
you.
at the beginning of this seminar, you shared
Yeah.
your own experience, or meaning that you tend to be laughing when you
Yes.
are right. My question is, then you manage to desensitize your
Yes.
emotions. Then
Yes.
does it make change in your kind of kind of response when you
Yes.
see in some kind of emotional kind of client?
Yes. So I think that how the desensitization has worked in terms of my coaching sessions is I think that a year ago, if I had a client who was belligerent and angry and opinionated, I would tend to distance them. I may have smiled at them in an inappropriate way, but now I feel like because I've been through that training program with myself, I can try to think about things like how can I be more compassionate to this person? This person is upset. How can I show compassion rather than distancing myself? What is going on with this person? What is the trigger? Why are they feeling so angry? Can I think about that? And so I'm really trying to show understanding and compassion rather than distancing myself from them. So that's a really great question because what I really like about the question is you're saying, um, how do I take the learnings from watching the video clip and apply it in my sessions? And that's really what I did is I watched the video clip enough so that I was able to remain with the with the video with the actors, and I was able to think in a compassionate way and to think about what was going on in terms of, well, how was the husband triggering the wife? Why was the wife's laughter at this point so antagonistic, etc., etc. So great question. Thank you very much indeed. So maybe I can just ask you a question, if that's all right. Do you see, from your practice, do you find some clients easier to work with than others?
Yeah, quite naturally, yes.
And what sort of clients for you are not so easy to work? If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to answer.
Well, so some clients, firstly, some clients really do not have a quite clear idea how this coaching works and
Right.
what they can expect. That's quite a kind
Yeah.
of the first level of difficulty, and
Yes.
also some clients have really in a serious kind of challenges and kind of problems that they cannot pick up so easily because they
Yes.
are really suffering. So the psychological safety in order
Yes.
to kind of make sure that they can speak whatever it is a quite important key that case. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So for you, it's the clients who are coming to coaching and who clearly want to make change, but are not really sure how coaching works and how confidentiality works. That's those ones are more difficult for you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be really interesting for you to try out this process of gathering feedback. So creating a little questionnaire like in the slides, and just see if so it's a very interesting thing to think about. And in some areas that I work in, I will email people. So there's an area that Claire mentioned before that I work in called Schema coaching. In that area, I actually often email people a little brief paper about how this works and whether they want to engage in it or not. It'd be very interesting for you to get some feedback from some of those clients as to what would actually help them in that space. Maybe if they read something before, I don't know, but it's always so interesting just to explore that issue.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try that then.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
And then in the chat, Iain, we've got Myrna has said, I never find an easy client.
well, there's a wonderfully honest statement, and I think that's a great comment because, of course, if our clients' problems were easy, they wouldn't need to come to coaching. So, but I think in terms of the technique and in terms of emotional engagement, it's exactly what Akiko and I were talking about, which is essentially that if you can think about, well, which clients do I find easy to work with and which clients are maybe a little bit more difficult? If we can start to have that kind of spectrum, have that approach to thinking about our clients, then we can pick on some of those kind of emotions that might arise. So do you have a sense of which clients are more difficult than others? If none of them are easy, which are more difficult than others? Do you have a sense of that?
You're asking me?
Yes,
Yes,
if you don't.
okay. To be honest, what I find with the clients, the most difficult ones are the ones who believe that coaching is gonna change something. So here I feel that like, wow, we're gonna like discover this world together,
Yes,
and they're like hungry to know what's coaching. And then I'm the one who's gonna be with them in this journey for the first time, like the guide in the museum. So
yes,
imagine how is it gonna be? It's not an easy thing, but it's so
no,
beautiful.
yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
it's
yes,
amazing. Yeah,
yes.
when you explore with the client what they are looking for and they didn't know what was it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Look, I agree. I think that is so important. And that's really the art of coaching. You know, we're not therapists. We're not here to diagnose and tell people what the right approach is. We're really fellow travelers with our clients, aren't we?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, okay. No, that's great. So another question in the chat box. I think the clients who are assigned coaching through company programs. Hey, this is a really great question. I don't know if you know the work of the very famous American psychologist Richard Boyatzis, but he's got a very good book called I think it's called Helping People Change, and it's really about coaching. And he separates coaching into two different types. So he says there is coaching for compliance, and that's really what you're talking about, Ashu, where you're saying these people are essentially coming because the company has got them, has told them, you know, this is good for you, kind of like medicine sort of thing. So he separates coaching for compliance, which is that sort of coaching, and what he calls coaching with compassion, which is really the sort of coaching that we all really want to do. And I think that if you do get clients who are assigned, then let's talk about that because I think that's a really difficult thing to deal with. Maybe if I just share a couple of things that I tend to do. One is I always make it clear to those clients that this is completely voluntary. And if you don't want to be here, that's fine with me. And if I think the person is really being pressured, I really emphasize you know, if they want me to say, look, I don't think coaching is relevant for this person or whatever it is to get them out of it, then I'm happy to do that. What do other people do with these clients who are assigned through company programs? Do we get many of those, and how do we deal with them? Because they can be unwilling clients.
I've got two from two different projects in two different countries right now. And
Yes.
it's so interesting that it's similar topics coming from these and very different ones here, but lots of similarities from the same organization, which
Ah,
we contracted, and obviously all the clients know, all the coachees know that the general themes that come up, we're allowed to feed those back, obviously
yes,
without names, to the
yes,
organization for
yes,
things that need to change in the system.
yes.
And what a difference in these two organizations. They're both in energy, and
Yes.
yet, gosh, really quite fascinating.
So you're really taking a systems approach to your coaching. You're saying that the issue isn't just the person in front of me. The issue is the context of the person in their organization. Therefore, what I'm only going to contract for is I will see these company assigned clients, but I will also give the company feedback in terms of what needs to change. Look, I think that's great, Claire, because I do think that unfortunately, in some cases, coaching has become a bit of a cop out by managers who don't want to deal with their own with their own team's people issues. They want to contract it out to a coach. And I think that's totally inappropriate. But I think the systems approach can help us to give those people feedback and then ideally to start actually coaching the boss. Yeah.
Here, here.
So other people, do you get clients that are assigned, and how do you deal with them, and what kind of emotions come up for you under those circumstances? Any thoughts? I think that some of the people that I supervise who get into this area, I think it's a very unfortunate thing in coaching that um, uh, coaches, organizations are now starting to see and introduce coaching at a wider scale. And therefore, they are wanting more and more people to be involved in coaching. And I think that they're price conscious, so they tend to go with organizations who have lower level coaches who don't charge as much. So they can kind of tick the box in terms of, well, 20% of our executives have had coaching, whatever the number is they want to achieve. And I think that's a very unfortunate thing as well. I was talking to someone the other day who was from Portugal, and he said that he thinks that the growth of these large companies, which are offering contract coaching, is the Uberization of coaching. In other words, it's turning it into a commodity. It's cutting down the price that's paid to the individual coaching. It's taking the focus away from the quality of the relationship and the change that people are making, and it's moving it into, well, we're doing this for our people, and therefore we're good employers. So I do find it's a fascinating area. And obviously, as coaches, we just need to be careful about this. So, any final comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. If you are interested in the book, you can buy it from Troubadour, or you can buy it from Amazon. It's quite easy to get copy. I priced it at what I hope is a very reasonable price. So I hope that you will explore this area and really use it to make the most of your coaching ability. Coaching is such magic stuff. And if we can steadily improve throughout our career, we're really going to be able to have a major impact. So thank you very much indeed.
Iain, thank you so much. And you've made me even more aware of my sort of fear of missing out when I want to attend every conference and attend every single webinar instead of consolidating what
Yes,
we've already got, really. Really
yes.
appreciate it. I look forward to buying your book as well, and
Thank
see
you very
everyone
much.
soon.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.